I once thought I had everything. A stable job at Chicago General Hospital, a cozy little home in the suburbs, and peaceful evenings spent with my husband and son. David, my husband, was a successful real estate agent, often busy with client meetings. And Ethan, our 12-year-old boy, was the light of my life. He would chatter endlessly about school every time I came home from a night shift. After my sister Sophie endured a painful divorce, I took her in, hoping that our home could help heal her broken heart. But then, small changes began to creep into our lives. David started coming home later, always glued to his phone. Sophie, once a shadow of herself, suddenly began putting on makeup, buying new clothes, and going out often. Ethan, my usually cheerful boy, grew silent, retreating into his room more and more. I felt something cracking beneath the surface, but at the time, I chose to ignore it. I told myself that everyone changes eventually. I was wrong. That night, Chicago lay under a thin veil of snowfall, the sky heavy and dark like a sheet of black silk. I was finishing a grueling night shift at the hospital, my eyes burning from exhaustion. The clock had just ticked past 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed in my scrub pocket. An unknown number. I normally wouldn't have answered, but a strange, cold dread filled my chest. I pulled the phone out and pressed it to my ear. Mrs. Carter? This is Sheriff Davis. Your family, your husband, sister, and son, have been in a serious car accident. They're being brought to Chicago General right now. The ground beneath me collapsed. I froze, feeling as if my entire body had been dragged into a bottomless abyss. I'm already at the hospital. I stammered, flinging off my white coat and sprinting toward the emergency department like a madwoman. My legs barely carried me through the blindingly bright hallways, my chest heaving, my heart pounding out of rhythm. When I shoved open the ER doors, the scene that greeted me nearly made me collapse. Amidst the harsh fluorescent lights and the relentless beeping of monitors, 3 gurneys were wheeled in. David, his face bloodied, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Sophie, pale as death, blood trickling from her forehead. And Ethan? My precious boy, so small and still, with his head wrapped in stark white bandages. Ethan! I screamed, trying to reach him, but a colleague pulled me back. Emily, stay calm. They're doing everything they can. Susan, the head nurse, wrapped her arms around me, holding me upright as my knees threatened to give out. Everything blurred into chaos. Code blue. Prepare the defibrillator. BP dropping fast. Intubate the pediatric patient immediately. I stood frozen, powerless, watching the people I loved most fight for their lives. Amidst the turmoil, a police officer approached me. We need to speak with you, Mrs. Carter. I nodded numbly, my hands clenched into trembling fists. We moved to a quiet corner of the ER. This crash, it doesn't appear to have been purely accidental, the officer said gravely. According to witnesses, there was shouting inside the vehicle just before it lost control. I stared at him, my mind struggling to piece together the nightmare unfolding around me. We also recovered your husband's phone at the scene, he continued, producing a shattered smartphone. I reached for it with shaking hands. The screen lit up without a password, displaying an unsent message. Sophie, we have to tell Emily. We can't hide it anymore. Ethan knows. A shudder tore through me. Can't hide it anymore. Ethan knows. I couldn't breathe. Sophie. David. No. It couldn't be. I clutched at the last threads of denial. My son. Ethan. I whispered. The officer nodded solemnly. Your son witnessed something deeply upsetting. And it seems tonight, your husband and sister were arguing about whether he might reveal the truth. I clutched my head, the tears pouring down unchecked. My sweet boy, my Ethan, had seen the raw betrayal of his father and his aunt. Silent screams ripped through my chest, drowning me. Later, the doctors updated me. All 3 are temporarily stable. But Ethan has suffered a traumatic brain injury. The next 24 hours will be critical. I sank to my knees beside Ethan's bed, gripping his small, cold hand. I'm here, Ethan. I won't leave you alone again. Night after night, I refused to sleep. At the slightest twitch of Ethan's fingers, I would leap up, begging the doctors for hope. The police investigation continued. They found a crumpled piece of notebook paper in Ethan's backpack, written in his shaky, childlike handwriting. Today I saw Dad and Aunt Sophie kissing in the kitchen. Dad said it's grown-up business and told me not to tell Mom. But I hate lying. I don't know what to do. Reading those innocent, broken words shattered what was left of my heart. Ethan had borne a burden far too heavy for his tender shoulders, the weight of secrets, betrayal, and unbearable loneliness. In the endless hours sitting vigil by his side, I asked myself over and over. Why didn't I see it? Why did I let my son suffer alone? On the third day after the accident, David and Sophie regained consciousness. But I didn't visit them. I didn't trust myself not to explode. One late night, as I sat by Ethan's bed, gripping his hand tightly, I felt a slight movement. I choked on a sob, leaning closer. Ethan. It's Mommy, sweetheart. His eyelids fluttered open. His voice, a mere whisper. Mom. Tears streamed down my face. Doctors rushed in, running checks, and finally smiled. Brain functions looked promising. No signs of permanent damage. I clutched my boy to my chest. You won't ever have to carry a burden like that again, I whispered to him. I promise. But deep down, I knew the next step was inevitable. I had to confront David and Sophie. I had to hear the truth, from their own lips. And when that moment came, I would be ready. One cold morning, with only a faint, weak sunlight blurring the frost on the hospital windows, I made up my mind. It was time. I had to face them. I asked Susan to watch over Ethan and walked alone toward the recovery wing where David and Sophie were being treated. My footsteps echoed through the long, hollow corridors. Each step felt like I was dragging a mountain behind me. The door to room 217 was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. David sat propped up against the bed frame, his arm still in a heavy cast, his face tense the moment he saw me. Sophie sat beside him, her head bowed low, her hands twisted together nervously on her lap like a child caught doing something terribly wrong. I stood there, saying nothing, letting the silence weigh down the room like a death sentence. Finally, David spoke first. Emily. I'm sorry. Such simple words. Such a hollow apology. There was no apology in the world that could mend what they had broken. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Why? My voice was cold, cutting through the air like a blade. David swallowed hard. It started, after Sophie's divorce. She was lonely. I only wanted to comfort her. Comfort her? I cut in, unable to hide the biting sarcasm in my voice. So comforting her meant sleeping with my sister? David dropped his gaze. There was no defense. Sophie trembled, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen, Emily. She whispered. At first, it was just leaning on each other. But then. I spat the words, barely able to contain the rage. And then you betrayed me. In the very home I built for my family. I stared at them, these two people who were once family, once dear to me, and who now looked like strangers soaked in shame. Did either of you think about Ethan? Silence. I pulled the crumpled note from my pocket, Ethan's shaky confession, and placed it on the bedside table in front of them, like dropping a loaded gun. David and Sophie read it, their faces crumbling, their tears falling freely. But I felt no pity. Not anymore. After a long, heavy silence, David finally spoke, his voice breaking. I'll sign the divorce papers. I won't fight for custody. I know I don't deserve to be his father anymore. Sophie reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I took a step back. There's no going back, I said, my voice calm, almost eerily so. I don't hate you. But you have erased yourselves from my life, and from Ethan's. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing away a chapter of my life that had been ripped apart. When I returned to Ethan's hospital room, he was more alert, his big, round eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. I sat beside him, taking his small hand gently into mine. It's over, Ethan, I whispered. It's just you and me now. His lower lip quivered. Mom, will you be sad forever? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tears spilled from my eyes, but I smiled through them, leaning closer. No, my love, I said softly. I'll be sad today. But tomorrow, we start again. And I kept that promise. The months that followed were a grueling battle, finalizing the divorce, moving to a new home, starting therapy for Ethan, piecing our lives back together from the ashes. Every day felt like running a marathon through quicksand. But when I saw Ethan laugh again, really laugh, the way he used to, I knew I had made the right choice. 1 year later, we had built a new life, smaller, simpler, but filled with genuine joy. I learned to trust again, not in others, but in myself. I learned that I could survive heartbreak. I learned that I was worthy of happiness. And Ethan, my brave boy, he learned too. He was no longer the little boy curled up in fear, clutching a pillow in the dark. He had become a young man, strong and full of love. We survived. We weathered the storm. And once again, we found the light. One Sunday morning, as the first gentle rays of sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, I was preparing breakfast when I heard hurried footsteps from the living room. Ethan, taller now, stronger, ran into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me from behind. Mom. Are we still going on the picnic with Ben and Joshua today? I laughed, turning around to ruffle his messy hair. Of course, sweetheart. Just make sure you wear your jacket, it's still chilly outside. Our lives had slowly settled into a new rhythm. Ethan had made new friends, met new teachers, and found new reasons to smile. I, too, had allowed new people into my heart, cautiously at first, then more openly. Ben, a single father with a kind soul, had drifted into our lives like a gentle breeze, no pressure, no demands. Just long conversations over coffee, afternoons spent watching the boys play in the park, and quiet companionship on cold, lonely days. As for David, after the divorce, he moved to the West Coast, seeking a fresh start, trying to mend the wreckage he'd left behind by involving himself in volunteer work. And Sophie. One day, she showed up at my door, a small bouquet of flowers trembling in her hands, her eyes hesitant and filled with old pain. We talked. Not to erase the past, some wounds would never fully heal. But to acknowledge that, despite everything, we were still bound by blood. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness meant setting myself free from the weight of bitterness. That evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat alone by the window, a steaming cup of tea warming my hands. Outside, the stars scattered like diamonds across the quiet Chicago night. I pulled out my old journal, the one that had captured so many tears, and this time, I wrote something different. We fell. But we stood back up. Every crack in a broken heart isn't a sign of weakness, it's where the light gets in. Tomorrow still awaits. And I, Emily Carter, will move forward, stronger, freer, and filled with love. I lifted my head and gazed out into the vast sky. A new chapter had truly begun.